In the spring of 2023, the body of Russian woman Anastasia Miloskaya was found, crudely wrapped in plastic in a mattress, after it had been dumped in a garbage container in Balashika, in the Moscow region. A witness reported that the 38-year-old was beaten and strangled, as her whole face was red and swollen. Within days, her teenage daughter was arrested alongside 3 other teenagers on suspicion of being involved in the murder. None of those taken into custody was named, but one of them was identified as the boyfriend of Miloskaya's daughter, who'd reportedly been living at their apartment. The victim believed that he was a bad influence on her daughter and had reportedly asked him to leave. The teenage couple were enraged by the decision and consequently planned to murder her. They stole over $4,300 from Miloskaya's savings and paid 2 other teenagers to carry out the killing. The couple were believed to have been present at the apartment to grant their accomplices access to the home. Miloskaya was beaten and fatally strangled upon returning from work. The daughter and her boyfriend remained at the apartment with the dead body for 2 more days. They eventually removed Miloskaya's remains on an improvised stretcher and dumped them in the garbage container, where they were later discovered by a janitor. All 4 teenagers were connected to the murder and taken into custody in the aftermath. A mental health evaluation was ordered for Miloskaya's daughter, and as of the latest updates on the case, she was deemed sane and fit to face judgment for her role in the incident. Number 6. Andrew Conley. On the night of November the 28th of 2009, teenager Andrew Conley killed his younger brother Connor as he sought to emulate the fictional serial killer Dexter Morgan from the Dexter TV series. The character, portrayed by Michael C. Hall, is a forensic lab worker who, driven by an inescapable urge to kill, targets criminals that elude the justice system. While playfully wrestling with Connor at their home in rural Indiana, Andrew put him in a chokehold and applied pressure until he passed out. He then dragged his brother to the kitchen, where he manually strangled him for up to 20 minutes. Andrew subsequently wrapped Connor's head in 2 plastic bags. A coroner would later testify that the younger Conley may have still been alive after the initial attack, but the bags ultimately ended his life. Andrew then repeatedly slammed his brother's head on the pavement of their parents' garage before dumping him in the trunk of his car. In the immediate aftermath, Andrew went to his girlfriend's home where they watched a movie, and he gave her a promise ring while his brother's body was still in his car. He later disposed of it in a park near his rising sun home. When his parents came home from work, Andrew told them that Connor was at his grandmother's place. When asked to pick him up a few hours later, the teen walked into a police station and surrendered. During subsequent interviews, Andrew claimed that he identified with Dexter Morgan and felt just like him. He'd reportedly fantasized about killing people since the 8th grade and compared the urge to a hungry person craving a hamburger. He was reported to have spoken casually to detectives when revealing the chilling details of the killing. 3 different psychological experts attested that Andrew was severely mentally ill. Against the advice of his defense attorneys, Andrew, who'd become known as the Dexter Killer, pleaded guilty to murder in the fall of 2010. He was sentenced to life without parole. Number 5. Christine Paolila. Growing up in Long Island, New York City in the 1990s, Kristen Paolila had a difficult life at home and in her social circle. Paolila's father passed away in a construction accident when she was a baby. She was mainly raised by her grandparents after her mother had developed a drug addiction and lost custody of her. Paolila was prescribed thick glasses because of her poor vision and also had to wear wigs because she suffered from alopecia. She became the target of frequent bullying and ridicule at school. Paolila's life changed for the better after her mother overcame her drug issues and regained custody. They moved to Texas, and Paolila enrolled at the Clear Lake High School, where she became friends with Rachel Colorutis and Tiffany Rowell. They helped Paolila fit in as well as improve her appearance to the extent that in 2003 she was voted Miss Irresistible by other students at the high school. Around that time, she started dating 21-year-old Christopher Lee Snyder, whom her friends and family regarded as a bad influence due to his frequent drug use and lengthy criminal record. The relationship was, by all accounts, turbulent, and Snyder was abusive towards Paolila, who'd started using drugs while they were together. On July the 18th of 2003, the couple visited Rowell's home in Clear Lake City. Also present were Rowell's boyfriend, Marcus Priscilla, Rachel Colorutis, and Priscilla's cousin, Adalbert Sanchez. At some point, an argument erupted between Priscilla and Snyder. As tensions escalated, the latter and Paolila killed all 4 people present at the home, shooting each of them multiple times. Raul and Colorutis were both shot in the crotch area, and Paolila used the butt of a revolver to crack Colorutis' skull as she was crawling towards a phone to try and get help. The couple left virtually no evidence at the crime scene, and the police initially treated the incident as being drug-related. Snyder and Paolila broke up in the aftermath. She got married to a man by the name of Stanley Rott, who she'd met in rehab, and to whom she eventually confessed the murders. They both went into hiding, and using trust fund money that had been left for Paolila by her father, spent months from late 2005 to the summer of 2006 doing drugs in a San Antonio hotel room. Paolila was ultimately tracked down and arrested by Texas police in July of 2006. Rott was taken into custody as well after dozens of heroin vials were discovered in the married couple's room. Paolila admitted that she'd had an active role in what had become known as the Clear Lake murders, but placed most of the responsibility on Snyder. In October of 2008, she was convicted on 4 counts of capital murder but avoided the death penalty due to her age at the time of the incident. She was sentenced to life in prison and will be eligible for parole in 2046. Number 4. Riley Peckham. On January the 23rd of 2022, Wayne Peckham and his son Riley brutally murdered 39-year-old Matthew Rodwell in Norfolk, England. The victim had been dating Wayne's estranged wife, Kerry. Wayne, whose marriage had reportedly broken down due to his abusive and controlling behavior, had previously stalked Rodwell. He vandalized his car and posted a video to Facebook of him burning a coat that Rodwell had bought for his youngest son, Harvey. Riley took his father's side in the argument and, acting under his influence, went to Kerry's home in January of 2022. The 23-year-old gained access to the residence through a first-floor window. He found a pair of Rodwell's shoes at the bottom of the stairs and confirmed his presence at the address to Wayne, who let himself in through the front door. Rodwell hid in a wardrobe and called the emergency services, telling the operator that he was afraid of what would happen if the men found him. Riley was heard shouting, "You're going to die, here doggy," and "good boy," before locating Rodwell. He and his father savagely attacked the man at the bottom of the stairs. Kerry tried to intervene but was powerless to stop the duo's onslaught. Rodwell was repeatedly punched, kicked and stomped on before being strangled. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Responding enforcement found Wayne as he was attempting to hide behind a curtain. Riley escaped after being handcuffed, but was recaptured at his great-grandfather's address a few hours later. The duo denied murder at Norwich Crown Court, but there was ample evidence against them. Aside from Kerry being a witness to the attack, Rodwell's DNA was found under both men's fingernails and traces of his blood were discovered on their clothing. The senior investigator assigned to the case described the father and son as being overcome with jealousy and rage, acting like a pack of animals. After a trial lasting several weeks and 10 hours of deliberations, the jury found them guilty of murder. Wayne was sentenced to 24 years in prison while Riley was sentenced to 18. Number 3. Jacob Evans. On the night of October the 3rd of 2012, teenager Jacob Evans was at home in a gated community of Weatherford, Texas, with his mother, 48-year-old Jamie, and his younger sister Mallory, who was in her teens. His father was out of town on business at the time. Jacob went to Mallory's bedroom and asked her to watch a movie with him, which she agreed to do. Later on, they had a playful pillow fight. The entire time, Jacob had a knife in his pocket and was thinking about killing his sister along with his mother. He then went to his grandparents' home across the street and retrieved a .22 caliber revolver before returning to his house. He told Mallory that their mother needed her and shot her when she came out of her room. He went downstairs and opened fire on Jamie multiple times. Jacob went back to his room and emptied the shells from his gun, but then heard commotion and realized Mallory was still alive. He loaded the revolver and shot his sister in the head 3 to 4 times. It would later emerge that Jacob's initial plan had been to kill Jamie and Mallory before walking over to his grandparents' place and gun them down, along with his oldest sister, Emily, who was at their home. However, after the double murder, he placed a loaded gun on the kitchen counter and called 911, telling the operator he'd just killed his mother and sister. During the call, he admitted that he'd been planning to kill pretty much anybody for a while, and that he'd targeted his family because they were suffocating him. When the operator asked why, Jacob told them, "I don't know. I'm pretty, I guess, evil. Whatever, I'm sorry." Jacob was subsequently arrested at his home without incident. In a 4-page confession later released to the public, the teen wrote that he targeted his family because they were becoming people he hated, calling them racists and bullies. It also emerged that his murderous fantasies had been partly influenced by the 2007 remake of the slasher horror Halloween, which he'd reportedly watched 3 times in the week leading up to the incident. In the movie, young Mike Myers kills his sister as well as her boyfriend and her mother's boyfriend. He's then sent to a mental health institution but resumes his spree 15 years later. Jacob, a quiet teen who'd never gotten in trouble, claimed he was impressed by the ease and lack of remorse with which Mike Myers killed and believed it would be the same for him. Jacob was deemed incompetent to stand trial and sent to a mental health facility until 2015. Once cleared to face legal proceedings, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and was given 45 years for each count, with the sentences to run concurrently. Today's topic was requested by Prod Flexway. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Alison Fluke Akron. In the fall of 2022, Kansas woman Alison Fluke Akron, aged 42, was sentenced to 20 years in prison and 25 years of supervised release after pleading guilty to providing material support to the ISIS extremist organization. Fluke Akron had converted to Islam while attending the University of Kansas and eventually became radicalized. She subsequently traveled to Egypt, Libya, Syria, and Iraq to cement her connections with the extremist group. Started in 2014 and possibly further back, she was involved in a number of activities on behalf of ISIS and was married several times while working her way through its ranks. Fluke Akron, a teacher by training, eventually rose to the command of Katiba Nusayba, a military battalion composed solely of female members who were married to ISIS fighters. Her activity in that capacity was summed up as brainwashing girls into killing. She became a guiding influence in their lives and trained over 100 fighters in the use of automatic weapons and explosives. Fluke Akron was reported to have even forced one of her own teenage daughters to marry an ISIS extremist when they were living in Syria. The daughter in question and another of Fluke Akron's 12 children alleged in court letters that they'd been brutally abused by her growing up. Additionally, Fluke Akron pushed for an attack on U.S. soil that reportedly involved packing a vehicle with explosives and detonating in the basement garage of a shopping mall using a cell phone triggering device. Her plan was considered, but ultimately abandoned. According to her defense attorney, some of Fluke Akron's actions stemmed from self-preservation, and she disavowed her support of ISIS in 2019. In the aftermath, she worked at a school and a non-governmental organization in Syria before surrendering to local police in the summer of 2021. Next up, after number 1, we have our earlier release on when taking after your parents goes wrong lined up for you. Stay tuned if you'd like. Number 1. Marielle and Adriana Gill. Manuel Gill and his teenage daughters Marielle and Adriana were found dead at a rental property in Renton, Washington on December the 11th of 2021. The bodies were discovered by the property's owner, who'd performed a wellness check after not seeing the teens for an extended period of time. Law enforcement was alerted and the deaths were considered puzzling at first, as there was no sign of foul play nor any obvious indication as to what had happened to the trio. Manuel had died roughly 5 days after the sisters, and the King County Medical Examiner's Office determined that they'd all succumbed to starvation. There was no food in the home, where investigators also discovered written materials on fasting. Betsy Alvarado, the girl's mother, later told the media that they were being brainwashed by what they were calling a religion, but must be a cult. Adriana had lived with her father since she was 12, after Manuel and Betsy had gotten divorced. Marielle eventually moved in with them as well. Manuel was part of an extremist fringe of the Black Hebrew Israelites, and his children followed suit, gradually modifying their behavior to adopt what they believed the religion demanded of them. 33-year-old Betsy reported that she'd gradually watched her daughters change the way in which they dressed and acted. They had no friends, had started covering their hair and adhered to an extremely strict diet. Their mother claimed that they'd eat nothing aside from a single leaf of spinach and refrain from doing most activities typical of other teenagers, claiming they went against the religion. Betsy suspected that Manuel had been indoctrinating them and putting stuff in their heads, ultimately leading to them starving to death. At the time of their passing, each of the sisters weighed less than 100 pounds. Number 11. Carolyn and Marielle Winnand. Police officers in Naples, Florida responded to a noise complaint at the home of realtor Carolyn Winnand in March of 2014. Upon making their way to the address, they found that the woman's 18-year-old daughter, Marielle, had been throwing a raucous party. The Naples Daily News reported that the teenager was helped to the doors by two friends because she was so intoxicated that she could barely stand. Officers contacted 56-year-old Carolyn, who told them she was out of town, and expressed surprise at the occurrence, giving law enforcement permission to clear her house. They proceeded to do so, but aside from finding over 24 teens inside, the police also found Carolyn hiding out in a bedroom. She defended the party, claiming it was safer with her around, but the police took her into custody, along with Marielle. Both were charged with hosting an open house party, a misdemeanor, but Carolyn also faced 26 counts of selling, giving, or serving alcohol to a minor. Collier County jail records indicated that she was released on a bond of $53,000. Number 10. Mamie and Whitley Smith. In May of 2022, a mother-daughter duo was arrested in Sumter County, South Carolina, after launching an attack on several middle school students. As reported by Sumter authorities, Mamie and Whitley Smith went to Ebenezer Middle School to confront a child who'd allegedly been bullying one of their family members. They asked for access at the front door and claimed they were heading to the attendance office. 67-year-old Mamie and Whitley, aged 37, then ran down the hall and charged the student they'd identified as the bully. They pushed the unnamed girl against a wall before hitting and scratching her in the face and head. Two more students were reportedly assaulted until staff and a resource officer were able to detain the duo. Local officers arrived at the scene and arrested the women on charges of third-degree assault by mob and disturbing schools. They risked up to a year in jail if convicted on the former charge. As of the latest updates on the matter, their bond was set at $10,000, but it wasn't clear if they had an attorney to speak for them. Number 9. Bryce and Daryl Hedrick. An unnamed police officer in Huntington Beach, California, pulled over two men as they were riding their bicycles at Beach Boulevard and Clay Drive on February the 9th of 2016. The suspects were later identified as 23-year-old Bryce Hedrick and his father Daryl, then in his late 50s. During the stop, the older man hit the officer in the head from behind, and after he dropped to the ground, both he and Bryce began repeatedly punching and kicking him. The officer's daughter, who'd been riding along in the cruiser, witnessed the brutal beatdown. The two men ultimately got back on their bikes and pedaled away. The officer, who'd reportedly lost consciousness at some point during the attack, regained his senses and afterwards received treatment for non-life-threatening injuries, including a concussion, at a local hospital. The 17-year veteran of the force was subsequently cleared to return to work. Bryce and Daryl were arrested shortly after the attack. They each pleaded guilty to one felony account of aggravated assault on a peace officer and one misdemeanor count of resisting and obstructing an officer. The father and son were sentenced to 6 and 7 years in prison, respectively. Number 8. Cassandra Kerr and Concetta Didiano. 40-year-old Cassandra Kerr and her daughter, Concetta Didiano, were arrested by Florida authorities in 2018 for attempting to deliver contraband into a prison via a drone. A guard at the Martin Correctional Institute in Indiantown spotted the aircraft flying over the facility's rooftop at around Christmas time. Staff alerted the sheriff's office, who located the women driving around the facility and took them into custody shortly before 2 a.m. According to an arrest report, Kerr told law enforcement, "I did it," indicating that the remote and iPad she had used to operate the drone were in the back seat of the car. She and 22-year-old Didiano planned to deliver cell phones and tobacco to Kerr's husband, who was an inmate at the prison. The woman was charged with introducing contraband into a correctional facility, while her daughter was charged with aiding in the crime. Number 7. Amber March and Martha Maseki. On the evening of March the 22nd of 2016, police in Lawton, Oklahoma, executed a search warrant at the home of Amber March in connection to an ongoing drug trafficking investigation. They found a little over a gram of methamphetamine, drug paraphernalia, digital scales, and baggies, as well as firearms in the form of a .45 caliber Glock 30 and a Rossi .38 Special. The woman wasn't home at the time, and after searching the residence, officers decided to wait for her to return. March and her mother, Martha Maseki, eventually went back to the address where they were met by the police. The former was arrested for possession of methamphetamine with the intent to distribute, possession of drug paraphernalia, and for possession of a firearm after a former felony conviction. Officers would soon learn that she hadn't been working alone. Upon interviewing Mahek, she admitted to have also been part of the drug operation, and she was arrested on similar charges as her daughters. Number 6. Joseph and Jashem Fearon. In late January of 2016, the father and son were arrested in Long Island, New York City, for running a massive drug operation out of a luxury apartment in an upscale neighborhood. The authorities served a search warrant at the Quorum address where they found $200,000 in cash and over 2.2 pounds of illicit substances worth an estimated $60,000. 40-year-old Joseph Fearon and his son Jashem, aged 23, both of whom had prior convictions, were taken into custody. The raid was part of a new initiative that allowed the Precinct Special Operations Team to execute search warrants. It was meant to enable a quicker response from the police department to areas where drug activity was reported. Then Suffolk County Police Commissioner Timothy Sinai stated that the latest operation had resulted in taking 2 very bad guys off the street. Joseph Fearon faced an extensive list of drug-related charges, while his son was charged with 5th-degree criminal possession of a controlled substance and 2nd-degree criminal impersonation. Number 5. Scott, Hayden, and Abby Cat. After losing his wife to breast cancer in the late 1990s, Ronald Scott Cat became addicted to drugs and alcohol while also struggling to provide for his young children, Hayden and Abigail. In spite of his addictions, Scott was regarded as a respected member of his McMinnville, Oregon community and a devoted single father to his children. However, unbeknownst to his family or anyone else, Scott led a double life as a bank robber. His father had been a loan officer in a bank, so Scott had gained intimate knowledge of the financial building's inner workings, understanding that the money was insured and that the employees had been primarily instructed to cooperate in case of a threat. The first bank he robbed was the same one for which his father had worked, only a few blocks from where he was living in McMinnville. From 2000 to 2002, Scott would hit various banks whenever the financial need arose, ultimately committing 5 robberies in the Portland area. During one of them, in 2010, he realized he'd need help and also considered that working with a partner would increase profits, as he could reach the vault. Scott didn't trust anyone aside from family, so he asked Hayden, then in his late teens, to help with what he described as his part-time job. Hayden reluctantly agreed and even joined Scott in case in a bank, but was ultimately too nervous to go through with it. His father robbed the bank alone anyway, changing his son's perspective on the job's dangers and difficulty. In 2012, Scott, Hayden, and Abigail began a new life in Texas. Scott had convinced his daughter to help him and Hayden with robbing banks, all the while maintaining the appearance of familial normalcy. On August the 8th, the 2 men entered a bank in Harris County, armed with realistic-looking airsoft guns, while wearing hats, sunglasses, and surgical masks. After the robbery, they were driven away by Abigail, who'd been waiting behind the wheel of the family's Volkswagen Jetta that had stolen plates taped over its real ones. On November the 8th, the Cats robbed the First Community Credit Union in Katy. Because construction was taking place nearby, Scott and Hayden wore bright orange vests. Upon making their way into the bank, they robbed it, and once again, 18-year-old Abigail acted as the getaway driver. Together, the trio had made $170,000 from the 2 robberies. They were eventually arrested after the police had tracked down the orange vests they'd worn in the heist to a Home Depot, reviewing surveillance footage as well as credit card information. Scott and Hayden were taken into custody without incident, as they were reportedly planning their 3rd and 4th robberies in the area, while Abigail surrendered shortly thereafter. She and Hayden were given a 5 and a 10-year sentence respectively, after pleading guilty to aggravated robbery. Scott was sentenced to 24 years in prison on the same charge. Number 4. Floyd and Jason Bebby. Florida men Floyd and Jason Bebby earned attention online in recent years through their mugshots, both of which showed the father and son sporting distinctive forehead tattoos. 48-year-old Floyd was arrested in 2007 and eventually convicted on charges of burglary and theft. He had the words "Get R Done" tattooed on his forehead and "Got R Did" on the back of his head. Floyd's son Jason was arrested at a different date on the same year for unspecified crimes, and his mugshot showed the 21-year-old with the word "psycho" inked on his forehead. While not visible in his processing photo, Jason also reportedly had the F word and "you" tattooed on each eyelid. Number 3. Paul and Ruben Flores. In May of 1996, at the end of her freshman year at California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo, Kristen Smart attended a friend's birthday party. At around 2 a.m. on May the 25th, she was found passed out on a campus lawn, and 2 classmates started helping her back to her dorm room. They were joined by another student, Paul Flores, who claimed he'd get 19-year-old Smart to her accommodation safely because his dorm was close to hers. He told the others, "Don't worry, I have her." But Smart was never seen again. On the 6th year anniversary of her disappearance, the teenager was declared legally dead. Paul wasn't immediately charged in connection to the incident, but as the years passed, evidence started indicating that he'd assaulted and killed Smart before covering up the crime with the help of his father, Ruben, in 2020. The authorities searched Paul's home in San Pedro, California, and found drugs used to sedate someone, as well as homemade videos of him abusing multiple young women in a file titled Practice. The following year, in March, the police searched Ruben's home with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar devices. Based on biological evidence, the authorities suspected that Smart had been buried beneath the deck of his home, but had recently been removed. In April of 2021, nearly 25 years since the student's disappearance, the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Department arrested Paul on murder charges and his father for being an accessory. The case was deemed solid enough to go to trial, but a date hadn't yet been established as of April 2022. Number 2. Mahek and Asrin Bukhari. In the early hours of February the 11th of 2022, Hashim Ijazuddin and Saqib Hussein, both aged 21, were traveling together in a Skoda Fabia on the A46 in Leicestershire, England. At some point during the drive, one of them called the emergency services, and a loud scream was heard. Before the call disconnected, the Skoda was then ripped apart after swerving across the road and hitting a central reservation barrier. The 2 men were believed to have been chased down by 2 other vehicles, but the reasons remained unspecified as of the latest information released to the media by the police. TikTok star Mahek Bukhari and her mother, 45-year-old Asrin, were charged with double murder, along with 6 other people, all reported as being in their 20s. Mahek boasted a following of 128,000 on the platform and claimed to have an elite relationship with her mother, who appeared in some of her videos. Earlier in January, a clip showed Mahek pretending to casually tell another person that she'd killed someone, as It'll Be Okay by Shawn Mendes played over the clip. She'd also spoken about having beef with other influencers, but it's unclear how and if that aspect was connected to the deaths of Ijazuddin and Hussein. As of mid-May 2022, Mahek and Asrin had entered not guilty pleas. Number 1. Anthony and Manuel Velasquez. In the fall of 2021, a father and son were taken into custody by a Los Angeles County SWAT team after they were linked to 3 shooting deaths that occurred in East Los Angeles. 31-year-old Anthony Velasquez was arrested on suspicion of murder, while his father, Manuel, was detained for allegedly acting as an accessory. Anthony was tied to the fatal shooting of Jesus Avalos in the early morning hours of February the 11th of 2014. The victim was found sitting in the driver's seat of his 1995 Toyota 4Runner after he'd been shot in the head and chest through the window. A year later, on July the 6th, a man believed by detectives to have been Anthony gunned down 38-year-old Eduardo Robles after they'd earlier engaged in a physical altercation. In the early morning hours of April the 22nd of 2018, a man wearing a ski mask approached a tent pitched on 3rd Street, in which 27-year-old Amanda Nicole Lopez lived. The culprit, suspected as Anthony, unzipped it and opened fire inside, killing Lopez. He then fled into a PT Cruiser later tied to Velasquez. The father was believed to have acted as a getaway for at least another of the killings attributed to his son. The latter's specific relationship to the victims remained unspecified. Commenting on the unusual aspect of a father and son committing murder together, Lieutenant Hugo Renaga told a media outlet, "Usually fathers protect their kids," before adding that Manuel's interpretation of that ideal was to keep his son out of prison. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be known as a bad influence or be negatively influenced by someone else? Let us know in the comments section below.